Hello, AP World historians, and welcome to episode 2 of Zero History. Again, I like the idea that you're coming in with zero and you're leaving with, well, maybe just 1%, but better than you had when you started off. Today, we're going to be taking a look at Unit 2.1 and 2.2 in the AP World History curriculum. I am your world history teacher, Ben Osborne, and I'm so excited to teach you today a little bit about the Silk Road and the Mongols. So without further ado, let's check it out. All right, so first off, real quick, just a little Unit 2 overview. Between about 1200 and 1450, we're going to see a lot of activity along existing trade routes that will increase in volume and scope. So we're going to see lots more trade, lots more technologies that are being used, all kinds of good stuff like that. Technology, commercial innovations, imperial expansion, demand for luxury goods were key factors of that trade. Growing trade networks accelerated cultural, biological, technological diffusion across Afro-Eurasia. Essentially, what this is saying is that as trade routes start getting bigger, we're going to start to see more complex trade. We're also going to see certain things come across. So, for example, new cultural ideas, religions, stuff like that. New biological things, such as like new types of food, but unfortunately also diseases, Black Death, all that kind of stuff. And of course, technological diffusion as well. Lots of new technologies and things that are coming along throughout this history. All right, well, today we're going to specifically talk about the Unit 2.1 and 2.2, the Silk Road and the Mongols. These two are really interrelated with each other because the Mongols are so important to the Silk Road. All right, if we look here at this little map of the Silk Road and also some other trading routes, the Silk Road, again, as a definition, was used as a vast network of trading routes that connected the east to the west. Essentially, Constantinople is going to be in the west, so at the end part of that red there, all the way to Chang'an in Asia, which is the capital of China. Now, I like this map because it also shows the blue routes. So the Silk Road is only the red routes. But as you can probably see, there are connections between it and the Indian Ocean Trade Network, which we will get to in a future video. But in this case, though, trade is moving from one direction to the other continually across this area, but it is all sort of interrelated and connected to each other because that's trade. That's how you want trade potentially to work. So the Silk Road, again, has almost always been there to some degree, but it kind of increases and decreases depending on the situation. So, for example, all the way back to the Romans, we know the Romans and the Hans traded a little bit. We know some trade was going on there. But the best place to do a lot of this trade, though, is probably more on the water. You're avoiding the long trips. You're avoiding bandits and deserts. This is a time period before they had a few technologies that also made the Silk Road a little easier. So while there probably was trade on the Silk Road in the earlier periods, it's during this period, during the Mongol times, that we're going to see the Silk Road becoming so incredibly important. Trade grows in this period, and that's going to help increase the Silk Road. But one of our questions here is why? Why does trade increase in this period? Three major things here to look at. First off is the Crusades. So the Crusades, again, are when Europeans go to the Holy Lands, the Middle East, and they, initially they conquer the territory. Eventually they start messing around over there. But they're going to move into that territory, they're going to conquer it, and they're going to take it over and establish new, what are called Crusader states. So as part of doing that then, they are going to discover new types of goods. Oops, wanting. That's a really bad misspelling. Sorry about that, guys. But they are wanting new types of goods because they experience them there. So imagine you're a French knight. You travel all the way to the Middle East. You appear in the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and you're super excited. You go there, you do all these things, and then in the process of doing this stuff, you end up experiencing new flavors, new tastes, new smells, all this stuff. You go back to France, you're looking for all that stuff again. So it's going to increase the demand that is there in Europe to try to get more and more of those goods. So that's one of the ways that it's going to happen. Next up, the Mongols. Because this whole area of the Silk Road is effectively under the control of the Mongols, it will increase trade as well. They are very strong. They could police it during this time period, which meant that there was less likelihood of being robbed or anything like that. Supposedly, the statement was that during the Mongol Empire, you could go from one end of the Silk Road to the other with a gold plate on your head, and you would never have to worry about bandits. I don't know why you would have a gold plate on your head, but apparently that is the old saying. New commercial practices also. We have a couple different things here, such as flying money, caravans, caravanserai, camel saddles, etc. We'll talk more about flying money and caravanserai in a second, but caravans are when you move lots of people together. So if you have 5 or 6 merchants, they band together for protection. And the camel saddle in particular is a big one here too. Camels are amazing beasts of burden. They can go long distances pretty easily, but they're difficult to ride because of that big old hump, right? So what happens then is that the creation of a effective camel cattle camel saddle is what's going to do it to make it so that it works a lot better. Again, it's not like people weren't riding camels before, it just wasn't particularly comfortable. So this thing above me here is an example of sort of an older camel saddle. There's some newer ones today, but they all kind of follow a very similar thing there. You simply put that on top of the hump, and the 2 little things on each side help to balance it out just a little bit, so it's easier to ride. But in addition to growing, like why it's growing here, what are some of the effects of that Silk Road trade? One of the effects here is oases and cities. So an oasis, of course, is a place where water is coming up out of the ground in an otherwise arid area. So like food and stuff can grow there, and you can water your animals. So these oases would sort of get larger and larger as far as like travel goes. And also cities. So Samarkand and Kashgar were fairly small cities, but they are going to get bigger and bigger as more and more trade comes their way. This picture above me here is modern day Samarkand. You can see the beautiful mosque that they have there. Now, caravanserai, as we mentioned before, are these incredible kind of like building structures, something that today sounds pretty familiar, but back then would have been unusual. So caravanserai is effectively what you might call a motel today. Not even a hotel, really, like more of a motel. Basically, it is a structure whereby you can pull up with your camels and have a place to settle down. So for example, this picture over here to my right, your left, is an example of a caravanserai. Now, I don't know when this one was built. It's not new or anything by any means, but you can get an idea of sort of what the ancient ones would look like as well. It's a building, a structure. The interior of it has a big courtyard. So you could have your camels there, you could water your camels, you could feed them, etc. It also tended to have places where you could store your goods to keep them safe, and also a place for you to stay. So instead of camping outside the city or trying to arrange with somebody with all your goods and then go into the city, you just had a nice little spot or location here. It reminds me in the 50s, when you pull up to these motels with a pool or whatever, and you would park your car right in front of your hotel room. That's a similar kind of concept, not like a more modern day hotel. Additionally, development of commercial innovations, so banking houses, Hanseatic League, and flying cash. So the problem, of course, is that if you are a merchant, you're moving from one part of the world to the other. You've got all of this products and gear and services and all these different kinds of things that you are trying to carry out, to take care of. So what do you do in order to deal with those things? How do you handle all those things? Well, the way that you do that is through new innovations in commercial technology. So flying cash, for example, is a great one. This is basically just what we would call cash today, or cash money. Also, banking houses. You can basically store or deposit in one part of the world, and then you can move to another part of the world where they have an additional banking house, and you can present your papers, which would allow you to withdraw money in that new location. Probably not as good as our modern day banks, but still much better than hauling around all that stuff from one place to another. While the Hanseatic League is not on the Silk Road, it is related to it in a sense. It is a commercial grouping of different Baltic states, and they were there, and they are designed to basically facilitate trade. So the reason that the Hanseatic League is going to come about, though, is because of all the extra trade that's coming in from the Silk Road. So there's going to be new organizations, even ones that are not directly on the Silk Road, around the world. You may notice, by the way, that some of these things are listed as effects, but also as causes. The reason for that is that they kind of build on each other. So flying cash maybe comes about in one small location, and that is a cause that allows people to move more. But then once more people are using things like flying cash, that leads to the effect of it becoming more popular as well. So there's a little bit of interrelationship between these two different things. All right, let's talk about the Mongols, everybody's favorite topic. One of the things that's always fun is the crash course videos from John Green, where he talks about the Mongols being the exception. That basically everything around the world has similarities, except that the Mongols, for some reason, are able to break that mold. But the Mongols are a people from Central Asia. They lived in clan-based societies, and they were pastoral nomads. That means that they moved around from place to place, and they had animals. In this case, I believe the yak is what they would use, though also horses. But they would move them from place to place to provide good grazing lands. One of the things about them is that they feuded amongst themselves for a long time, which kind of kept their power weak. They're too busy sort of fighting each other. And that really is the innovation that Genghis Khan is going to do to kind of bring them together. If you look at this map here, that's over there, you can see the red area is the modern day area of ethnic Mongols. So we have Mongolia proper. Of course, the country of Mongolia has Mongols, no surprise, but also Inner Mongolia there in China proper as well. Also, though, you can see lots of little scattered areas. These are groups of people who are descended from the Mongols. If you look at that red, well, it's more orangish, that orangish color there around the outside of that kind of line drawing, that will show you the extent to which the Mongols have traveled around the world and conquered territories. That's a huge empire. The kind of inset picture there would kind of give an example of sort of what maybe life was like for a lot of Mongols. This is a modern day picture, of course, but it's not too different or distinct. You can see that kind of beautiful plain there, right, with that kind of short grass there. In the background, these beautiful mountains that provide water, which allows for the rivers in this area to be pretty strong. But generally speaking, it's pretty arid. So winds are whipping along here. There's not a lot of like trees or anything. So the way that people lived was they had these things called yurts. So they are round, which allows the wind to go around them. They are heavily felted, which helps to keep the heat in. And they have these sort of little like wooden lattice works that they would put around the outside that would allow them to make structure out of those little homes. One thing, of course, like what do you burn in this area? There's not a whole lot of trees. How are you going to keep warm with your fire? Well, actually, they would use a variety of different things, but one of the big ones was dried out animal dung. That's going to smell good, but that will make sure that you are keeping warm in the cold, cold winters there. But what really changes for the Mongols then is going to be this guy. So Genghis Khan is going to change a lot of this. He will unite the Mongols into the empire or Khanate in 1206. He was born to Temujin in 1162 and is going to use like leadership, ruthlessness, military skills, all these things to help unite those clans together. He considered loyalty to be an important social trait, so he really emphasized that. And he had pretty liberal policies for the time. Again, nothing like compared to today, but definitely a little bit different than you would see otherwise. This picture above us here is way after his lifetime. It's kind of Sinicized, meaning he's kind of made to look like a Chinese person here. But, probably somewhat similar to what he looked like actually during the course of his life. But this guy is the one who's going to end up organizing all these things together and creating the modern Mongol Empire. So, for example, you can see here his conquest. It is incredibly impressive. That little star up there is sort of where Genghis Khan and his group is going to start out at, and you can see all the numbers there as they are going to expand and conquer throughout his lifetime until he dies in 1227. So one of the things about this, of course, is that his military is very well organized. They're very good at the military strategy and tactics they use. But also the other territories around him are kind of weak. He's sort of like in a lucky situation. So, for example, the Jin, the Western Xia dynasty, the Karakhatan Khanate, as well as the Khwarezmian Empire are all pretty weak empires at this time. So his ability to conquer them that's not to suggest that he's not incredibly talented. Of course he is, but it also will give you an indication that he kind of is there at the right time. All right, so one of the ways that they're going to be able to do this is because they have this successful military prowess, and of course Genghis's reorganization. So he really focused on skill and loyalty. So if you were loyal to him and his family, or you had exceptional military skill, you would be rewarded with generalships and things. It's not just like clan or family ties. It's not like, oh, Ted's my brother, he gets to be a general or whatever. Instead, it's based upon your abilities and your skills. Superior horsemanship is a big factor for them. A unique, small, and hardy horse, which also helped them to expand quickly. I've often used the phrase Mongol ponies, which makes it sound sort of silly, my little Mongol pony. But that's kind of what they are. Like this picture up here shows sort of a modern example. These are not huge horses. You don't want huge horses on these big plains. You need more food and water for huge horses. The taller they are, the less shaggy they are, the colder they're going to get. So these kind of small, hardy, little kind of horses are the ones that they use. They have a lot of endurance. European knights wanted big horses because they wanted to be able to use the lance to like strike people and stuff and use the power of the horse to break lines. But Mongols don't do that. They are going to use arrows, shooting from the saddle, or swords or whatever to try to defeat their enemies. So they don't need to have these gigantic horses. Unlike a lot of militaries at the time, they were not really obsessed with honor and would very happily retreat or use fake strategies against their enemies if they needed to. They're just about that win, right? They just want that W. So, for example, we have stories about Mongols who would, ride in towards their European enemies. They would strike and shoot some arrows, and then maybe a few of them would get killed or injured, and then the Europeans would march towards them in an attempt to continue the attack. Well, the Mongols would then run away, like they look like they're retreating. And so the Europeans, being so excited about it, would, of course, break ranks. A lot of these sort of poorly trained soldiers would break ranks and start running towards the baggage train, or the place where the Mongols kept all the goods, all the good stuff, right? And so in the process, then they're breaking ranks. The whole military organization and structure is falling apart. Well, guess what? The Mongols weren't really retreating. They just turned around and started shooting you all to defeat you. So that's just one example of the kind of things that they would do. Europeans would never do a retreat because it would look weak, but also because their militaries weren't very well trained, and so a fake retreat would just turn into a real retreat usually. But the Mongols were just very disciplined and very professionalized. All right, let's take a look here after some of these conquests then. After Genghis Khan, we're going to see it expand even further. The Pax Mongolica is the peace of the Mongols. It refers to the safety within the empire that everybody had. After Genghis and his grandsons will also help to expand his empire. For example, Batu and the Golden Horde will conquer Russia and invade Europe. Hulegu invaded the Muslim territories and established the Ilkhanate. You can see that right here above me. Modern day Iraq and Iran, basically. Kublai Khan invaded China and established the Yuan dynasty. Now, after Genghis dies, there's four sort of grand khans, his sons, and like a grandson. So or a couple grandsons, like Ogadai. Then we have Goyuk, Monkey, and then Kublai. But the problem, though, is that as the empire gets bigger, the centralization sort of falls apart. And so eventually you end up with like this, like the Ilkhanate, for example, which, well, is theoretically under the authority of Kublai Khan, but in reality doesn't do anything like that they say at all. They're just basically on their own because they don't care. And so that is going to end up leading to one of the big problems for the Mongols is how do you govern this gigantic empire? And they don't really end up having an answer, which is why the empire sort of falls apart over time. Now, one of the things that's fascinating about them is the way that they ruled their empire. So one of the things that they were is they were pretty tolerant of other cultures and often incorporated their ideas into the empire. So for example, if you show up in a town, they don't practice the same religion as you. Oh well. The rest of the world would not be very tolerant of this. They would, force all the Muslims out and make sure they're all Christians, or they would force all the Buddhists out and make sure they're all Muslims or whatever. But the Mongols don't really care. They have their own religion. Tengri, the sky god, is kind of an animistic religion. But a lot of Mongols convert to a lot of other religions, and they just don't really care that much about it. As long as you're doing what you're supposed to do, they just don't really care. They're also more than happy to incorporate new ideas. So if they find new languages or new military technologies or something like that, they're more than happy to bring those into their empire and make their empire even stronger because they're all about winning. That's what they want to do. They don't really care about these other things instead. One example of this, like they're going to allow locals into government in Persia. So they will allow in the Ilkhanate for a lot of locals to help run things. And that's true in some other places as well, on the lower end especially. Trade is also incredibly important to the Mongols, so they are going to protect and expand it. Again, that has to do with that Silk Road. Merchants are also going to have very, very high social status within the Mongol Empire. This is very different than in China. In China, the Confucians really don't like merchants, so that is a huge change for them. It's one of the things that the Chinese really don't like about the about the Mongols. That is a big factor for them as well. Now, while they're tolerant, again, we're also going to see one of the problems that the Mongols face, which is that they are a minority trying to rule a large majority. So in lots of places, that's not that big of a deal. Like if you go to the Central Asia, there's not that many people, so like the Mongols aren't that outnumbered. But when it comes to places like China, they are massively outnumbered. There are so many more Chinese than there are Mongols, and so they end up establishing some anti-Chinese laws. So in the Yuan dynasty, they have these laws to help control that population. So no intermarriage between Mongols and Chinese. No Chinese were allowed in high-ranking government positions. Those were all reserved for Mongols. In some very low level, they could do some things, but not a lot. They're also going to end the civil service exams. Like, what's the point in a civil service exam? I don't, if you're not a Mongol, you can't be in government leadership. That, why bother? You may see this and think, well, wait a minute, don't they want to win, or don't they care about, like, meritocracy? I mean, yes, definitely, but part of it also is that they want to make sure that that is amongst Mongols that those things are going on, not amongst just anybody. Also, the empire changes over time. So, over time, some of that toleration and stuff fades in some places. When the Ilkhanate converts to Islam, they're not as tolerant as they would be of other religions in some ways. So those are all examples sort of how that empire changes over time. And again, the biggest problem for them, and one of the biggest ways that they change over time, is that they're going to sort of gradually break up into these little constituent empires. They will start to fight against each other over border wars and stuff, and it will just end up being a big problem for everybody over time. So that is the Mongols and the Silk Road, very much interrelated with each other. Again, the Mongols are going to help protect the Silk Road. The Silk Road will bring wealth and knowledge and technologies to the Mongols. So they work well together in this example and in this situation. Coming up in Unit 2, we're going to be taking a look at a couple of other trade networks, such as the Indian Ocean Trade Network, as well as the Trans-Saharan Trade Network. We'll be checking all those out really, really soon. Thanks so much for watching. I appreciate it. And hopefully this will help you out a little bit when it comes to your AP World History tests and so forth. All right. Y'all take care. Thanks so much.